The lamp had burned down to a thumb of tallow when the wall finally gave up its secret, and Verena Maddox stood very still in the dark of the dead saloon, one hand flat against the cold plaster, listening to the sound a thing makes when it has been hidden for 30 years. There was a hollowness behind the boards. She had tapped that same stretch of wall 4 nights running, moving the lamp inch by inch, and 4 nights running the wood had answered her knuckles with the dull, packed thud of solid timber. Tonight it answered different. Tonight, low and to the left of the broken back bar, the wood gave back a thin, ringing emptiness, the voice of air sealed inside a place no living hand had touched. She did not move for a long moment. She had learned from a dead man that the first thing a careful person does when a locked thing speaks is nothing at all. Outside, the wind came down off the high country and pushed at the loose shingles of the iron wren, and the whole ruined building breathed around her, ticking and settling the way old wood does at night. The town of Loomis Forks had been dead longer than she had been alive. A single crooked street of silvered storefronts and caved-in roofs strung along a creek that no longer ran clear, and the saloon at the end of it was the largest corpse on the row. 3 marshals had come through that street across the years, each carrying the same rumor and the same warrant, each certain that somewhere inside the iron wren a strongbox sat with a stolen fortune locked inside it, and each one had walked the same warped floor she now walked and had gone away empty. She knew their names from the territorial record. She knew the seasons they had searched. She knew that not one of them had thought to listen to the walls. She lowered the lamp to the floor, knelt beside it, and let the trembling in her arms ease before she trusted her hands again. To understand why a young woman with $4 to her name was kneeling alone in a dead town past midnight, you have to go back to the man who taught her to hear what other people only looked at. His name was Tobias Maddox, and he was her father's brother, and he had been a locksmith and a tinsmith and a maker of safes in 3 territories before the consumption took the wind out of him. Verena had gone to him at 11, after the fever winter that emptied her father's house, and she had stayed at his bench until she was a woman grown. He did not raise her gently. He raised her the way you raise a tool you intend to use, with exactness and with patience, and with an absolute contempt for guessing. "A lock is not a mystery," he used to say, holding a tumbler up to the window light so she could see the wards inside it. "A lock is a sentence written by a man who wanted to be obeyed. You do not break it. You read it, and then you answer it in its own language." He taught her the language. He taught her the families of locks, the way other children learn the families of birds, the lever locks and the warded locks, and the great iron strong boxes, with their wheel packs and their hardened plates, and he taught her that every maker leaves a hand on his work the way a writer leaves a hand on a letter. By the time she was 20, she could stand before a closed iron door, lay her fingers on the dial, and tell from the feel of the contact points which shop had cut the wheels, and what year the pattern was sold. It was not magic, and Tobias hated when the men who came to the shop called it that. It was attention paid for over years, in a currency most people were unwilling to spend. When he died, he left her the bench, the tools, and a debt of $40 to the man who held the note on his little shop. The man who held the note was named Harlan Brett, and he ran the freight office, the land office, and most of the back rooms of the county seat, and he was not unkind, exactly, only certain, in the way certain men are, that a girl alone could not pay what a girl alone owed. He gave her 3 months. He told her this in front of 2 of his clerks, and one of the clerks smiled, and Verena did not weep and did not argue. She wrapped Tobias's tools in oilcloth, and she went looking for a closed door that no one else could open. That was how she came to the story of the iron wren. Old men in a county seat told it in pieces, never the whole thing at once. the way men tell a story they half believe is a curse. In its day, they said Loomis Forks had been the richest 2 miles in the territory, a placer strike that drew 4,000 souls in a single summer, and the Iron Wren had sat at the head of it, taking in dust and coin, faster than its owner could count. The owner was a man named Silas Whitfield, and Silas Whitfield owned more than the saloon. He owned the assay scales and the freight line and the only road out. And across the boom years, he had quietly bought, foreclosed, and forged his way onto every paying claim in the district, until the gold of half a county ran through his ledger and out the far side into his own name. When the placer thinned and the crowd drained away, Whitfield did not go broke like the rest. He moved to the county seat a wealthier man than he had arrived, and he built a brick house on the hill, and he was, the old men said, lowering their voices though he was 3 counties off and past 80 now, the richest and most respectable thief the territory had ever produced. What the marshals had come for was the proof. There had always been a story never proven that Whitfield had kept his real books, the true ledger of what he had taken, and from whom, locked in an iron strongbox in a hidden place inside the Iron Wren, against the day he might need to remember exactly whom he had ruined. 3 times across 30 years, a marshal had ridden up to Loomis Forks with that story and a federal warrant, and 3 times the marshal had torn through the rotting saloon board by board and found nothing but rat nests and broken glass, and 3 times Silas Whitfield's lawyers had let it be known gently that a man's good name was not to be dragged through the dirt on the strength of a ghost town rumor. The strongbox, if it had ever existed, was gone. The story died down. Whitfield grew old and respectable on the hill. Verena did not believe the strongbox was gone. She believed it was simply locked, and that a locked thing is not the same as an absent one. She came into Loomis Forks on foot in the last week of September, leading a borrowed mule loaded with her uncle's tools and a week of flour and beans. And she walked the dead street in the failing light and felt the particular cold that comes off a place where many people once were, and now no one is. The Iron Wren stood at the head of the row, with its false front facade leaning at a slow angle, the great painted letters of its old sign weathered down to ghosts no eye could read. She stood in the road and looked at it for a long time. Then she went in. The inside was a wreck of 30 winters. The roof had failed at the back, and a drift of leaves and snowmelt had rotted the floor to spongewood in one corner. The long bar still ran the length of the room, its mahogany top cracked and silvered, and behind it the back bar had collapsed into a heap of shelving and broken mirror glass. She did not touch any of it the first day. She walked the room slowly with a tallow lamp, and she did what Tobias had taught her to do in any unfamiliar place, which was to learn it before she disturbed it. She paced the outer length of the building along the street, counting her steps. She paced the inner length of the main room. The numbers did not agree. There were nearly 4 feet of building along the back wall behind the bar that the inside of the room did not account for. 4 feet of a house that exists from the outside and not from the inside is not a mystery to a person who builds hiding places for a living. It is an answer. The only question left was the door. She slept those first nights in the old storeroom off the kitchen, the one corner of the Iron Wren with a sound roof. And, by day, she worked at understanding the false wall without breaking it, because Tobias's first law was that you do not destroy a thing in order to learn how it opens. A man who built a wall to hide a safe did not mean for the wall to be smashed. He meant for it to swing, quietly, for himself. There was a hinge somewhere, and a catch somewhere, and a handhold somewhere, all disguised as part of an ordinary back bar in an ordinary saloon. She spent 3 days on her knees with a candle and a thin steel pick, reading the wall the way she had been taught to read a lock, looking for the one board whose wear did not match its neighbors, the one seam that had been opened and closed more times than dust alone could explain. On the fourth day, a man rode into the dead town, and Verena understood that she was not the only one who remembered the iron wren. He was young, perhaps 30, with a clerk's pale hands and a good coat too clean for the country, and he tied his horse in the road and walked up and down the street, looking at the buildings as though he were appraising them, which, she would learn, was exactly what he was doing. His name was Del Crane, and he worked for the Whitfield interests out of the county seat, and he had been sent, he said, because word had reached his employer that a squatter had taken up residence in a property the family still held title to. He said the word squatter without heat, the way a man reads a figure off a page. He told her the iron wren and the ground it stood on belonged to the Whitfield estate, that the family meant to clear the old town site, and that she would need to be gone by the first hard frost. Verena stood in the doorway with her uncle's pick still in her apron pocket, and looked at the clean young man and understood several things at once. She understood that Silas Whitfield, 80-some years old, in his brick house 3 counties off, still watched this dead street closely enough to know, within days, that someone had come to it. She understood that a man does not pay a clerk to ride 2 days to chase a squatter off a worthless ruin, unless the ruin is not worthless to him. And she understood, with a cold, clean certainty that settled the last of her doubt, that the strongbox the 3 marshals never found was still inside the wall at her back, and that the man on the hill knew it and had spent 30 years and a good deal of money making sure no one ever opened it. She told Del Crane she would be gone by the frost. He touched his hat and rode away, and she watched the dust of him out of sight. And then she went back inside and worked through the night. Knowing a thing is there changes the way you look for the way in. She stopped hunting for damage and started hunting for use. A door that a man opens often wears in a pattern a smashed-in wall never shows, and now that she knew someone had been opening this one or guarding it across the years, she looked for the polish of a hand. She found it on the 5th night, low on the back bar, on the underside of a shelf bracket that had no reason to be smoother than the rest. When she pressed it, nothing happened. When she pressed it, and at the same time leaned her shoulder into the 3rd board from the corner, the board moved a 1/4 inch, with a small dry groan, and the ringing hollowness she had heard behind the plaster shifted in pitch. It would not open further. Whatever held it had seized with rust and age, and she was not fool enough to force it in the dark with her arms already shaking. She marked the board with a scratch of charcoal, banked her lamp, and slept 4 hours. And in the gray of morning, she stood before the back bar in good light, and began the patient work of freeing a 30-year-old door without tearing it off its track. This is the part the marshals never reached, and the part the story most often forgets, because it is not dramatic in the way a search is dramatic. It is only labor. She worked oil into the seam of the false wall, a thread at a time, with a feather and a tin of the light oil Tobias had used on watch springs, and she let it sit and creep and soften the rust, while she worked the board back and forth, no more than a hair, never forcing, easing, the way you ease a frozen lock, and not the way you break one. The hinge was the trouble. She found it at last by feel, an iron pin set vertical inside the wall and corroded into a single seized mass, and she could not reach it to clean it. She could only feed oil down to it, along the grain of the wood, and wait, and work, and wait again, while the cold building creaked around her, and the daylight crossed the floor and was gone. It took the better part of 2 days. Her shoulders burned and her hands cracked at the knuckles, and the cracks filled with the black of the old oil and would not wash clean. She ate cold beans standing up so as not to lose the rhythm of it, and twice she fell asleep sitting against the bar with the feather still in her hand, and woke in the dark and went on. On the second afternoon, the board surrendered a full inch, and then another, and then the whole false section of the back bar swung inward on a concealed iron hinge with a long shriek of rust, and the cold air that had been sealed behind it for 30 years rolled out across her face. The breath of a room that had not been opened since before she was born. Behind the wall was a space no wider than a closet, and in the space, squat and black and patient, sat the strongbox. It was a hall-patterned safe, the heavy old kind built in the eastern foundries before the war and freighted west at enormous cost, near 4 feet tall and faced in iron plate, gone the deep brown black of long rust, with a single great brass dial at its center. Verena set her lamp on the floor of the closet and knelt before it and did not touch the dial. For a long moment she only looked at it, the way you look at a grave you have traveled a great distance to find. 3 men with federal authority had walked past this wall, never heard it. The thing they could not find had been 4 feet away from them the whole time, breathing its dead air into the dark, waiting for someone willing to listen instead of look. She laid 2 fingers on the dial and turned it, slowly once around, and felt the wheels inside answer her touch, and she smiled for the first time in a long while, because she knew the maker's hand and the feel of it the way she would have known her uncle's writing. What she did not yet know was that the lock had been changed. She learned it the next morning after a night of careful work that should have walked the wheels into line and did not. The contact points were wrong. The combination Tobias had taught her to derive from a hall safe of that pattern and age, working from the feel of the wheel pack and the slip of the fence against the gates, brought her again and again to a number that should have thrown the bolt and did not. She sat back on her heels in the gray light and understood, the way you understand a thing you should have seen sooner, that the wheel pack inside the safe was newer than the box around it. Someone had opened this safe years after it was sealed and fitted it with a fresh combination, and then closed the false wall behind himself and left it. Someone who knew the strongbox was here. Someone who had every reason to make certain no marshal and no thief and no clever girl ever read the old maker's hand and walked it open. She thought of the brick house on the hill and the old man inside it, and the clean young clerk he had sent to clear her off by the first frost. Silas Whitfield had not trusted the false wall alone. At some point, across the 30 years, while the marshals tore the boards of the front room, he had come quietly in the night and changed the lock on the thing they were looking for, so that even if the wall were found, the box would hold. It was the act of a careful man, and Verena, who had spent her life among careful men, felt something that was almost admiration and was mostly cold. A changed lock is not a closed door. It is only a new sentence to read. She gave herself to it for 9 days. She moved her bench into the closet beside the safe, and she worked by lamp and by the thin daylight that came through the failed roof, and she did a slow, blind arithmetic of the trait, mapping the contact area of each wheel by feel, drawing the picture of the lock she could not see. The method was her uncle's, and it was older than her uncle. A combination lock holds its number in a stack of brass wheels, and each wheel has a notch cut in its rim, and the bolt cannot move until every notch is turned. To lie beneath the lever, the trade calls the fence, you cannot see the notches. You can feel them, though, faintly, through the dial, as a place where the drag of the wheels eases by a hair, if your hands have spent 20 years learning to feel a thing that small. She walked the dial, a number at a time, 100 numbers around, listening with her fingers, and where the drag eased, she made a mark, and slowly the marks gathered into the shape of the hidden notches. She built a graph of it in charcoal on the closet wall, a wavering line for the resistance she felt at each point of the dial, because Tobias had taught her that a lock you cannot see can still be drawn, and a thing once drawn can be read. The work was monotonous and exact, and it broke against her again and again. The cold of the closet got into her joints and made her fingers clumsy. And a clumsy finger reads nothing, so she warmed her hands in her armpits between passes and went slow. Twice she was certain she had it, and twice the bolt held the dial, coming round to a number that was a hair off true, and twice she had to wipe the wall clean and begin the graph again. On the 7th day, she wept once briefly, from the sheer grinding fatigue of it. And then she wiped her face on her sleeve and went back to the dial, because weeping was not in the language the lock understood. In the middle of those 9 days, a second visitor came to Loomis Forks, and this one did not announce himself by daylight. She woke in the black of the third night to the small wrong sound of a horse breathing in the road, and she lay still in the storeroom with her hand on a hammer until she was sure of it. Someone had ridden in quietly and was watching the saloon. In the morning, she found the prints of a man's boots in the soft ground by the back wall, where he had stood a long time, and a place where he had crouched and waited, and she understood that the clerk's polite warning had been only the front of the thing. Whitfield had set a watcher on her. As long as she was only a squatter to be moved off by frost, a clerk and a deadline were enough. The moment she found the wall, the watcher would be enough no longer. She did not know how the old man on the hill could know she had found it. She only knew that the boots came back the next night, and the night after, and that the closer she worked to the bolt, the closer the watcher stood. His name, she would learn, was Pike, and he was an old hand of the Whitfield freight line, a quiet, enormous man with a face like a closed door. And his instructions were not to harm her. His instructions were to make certain that whatever she pulled out of the iron wren never left it. He did not threaten her. He watched. And the watching itself was the threat, the way a hand resting near a knife is a threat, and Verena understood the arithmetic of it perfectly. Whitfield did not need to break the law. He needed only to wait at the mouth of the wall and take from her, quietly, on a dead road, 2 days from any witness, whatever she was fool enough to find. She thought a long while about what to do, and what she decided was the thing Tobias would have decided, which was to be more patient and more careful than the man set against her. She did not run, and she did not confront. She changed the way she worked. He moved her lamp deeper into the closet where its glow would not show through the failed roof. She muffled the dial with a strip of felt so the small clicks of her work would not carry on the still night air. And she sent, by the freight rider who passed the county road once a week, a letter she had been composing in her head for days, to the one name in the whole story she trusted, an old woman who lived 3 days' ride to the south, and whose family the marshals' records said had been ruined in the Loomis Forks district in the boom years. The old woman's name was Orsana Calder, and she was the granddaughter of a man who had walked into Loomis Forks in the first summer of the strike with a legitimate recorded claim on the richest piece of creek bottom in the district, and who had walked out of it 18 months later. His claim somehow reassigned in the county book to the Whitfield interests, his protest unheard, his name quietly entered in the long ledger of people the rich man on the hill had erased. Verena had found the Calder name in the territorial record while she was still in the county seat, in the margin of a marshal's old report, a single line noting that the original claimant had sworn to his dying day that his deed was genuine, and that the recorder had been bought. The line had stayed with her. A man does not swear a thing to his death for nothing. She wrote to Orsana Calder and told her only this, that she had reason to believe the proof of what was done to the Calder claim still existed, sealed inside an iron box in the old saloon, and that if the old woman could make the journey she should come, and come prepared to wait, and tell no one her road. Then Verena went back to the dial. On the 9th day, in the cold, clean light of an October morning, The lock spoke. She had been at it since before dawn, working the last and most stubborn wheel, the deep one nearest the back of the pack, whose contact she had been unable to read clean for 3 days, and somewhere in the gray hour the felt-muffled dial moved under her fingers into a place where all the small resistances she had mapped on the closet wall fell, at once, into agreement. She felt the fence drop. She felt the gates of the wheels line up beneath it. 1, 2, 3, 4, the way water finds level. And she stopped, and her breath stopped, and she turned the dial. The last small distance, and felt, through the iron and through her hands and up into the bones of her arms, the great bolt slide back. The door of the strongbox swung open on the cold, sealed dark inside. She did not reach in at once. She knelt before the open box in the lamplight and let herself shake. All the held patience of 9 days coming loose in her arms and shoulders at once. And then she steadied, and she lifted the lamp, and she looked inside at what 3 marshals had crossed the territory to find and gone home without. There was no fortune. There was no gold, no coin, no dust, no banknotes. Verena had not expected any. Gold is the kind of thing a careful man spends, not the kind he hides for 30 years. What sat on the iron shelves of the strongbox in the dead air was paper, ledgers, bound in cracked black leather, their pages close written in a small, exact hand. A bundle of deeds and claim certificates tied in faded ribbon, the territorial seals still bright where the dark had kept them, and a stack of letters, and a long folded survey of the Loomis Forks Creek bottom, lot by lot and claim by claim, with a column of names down one margin and a second column beside it, in the same exact hand, recording for each name the date the claim had been taken and the false grounds on which the county book had been made to say it was sold. It was the true ledger. It was the thing the rumor had promised and the marshals had failed to find. The careful record a careful thief had kept against the day he might need to remember exactly whom he had ruined and how. Verena turned the survey to the light and ran her cracked finger down the margin of names, and near the top, in the small exact hand, she found the entry she had ridden across a territory to find. The Calder claim, the date it was taken, and beside it in Whitfield's own writing, the plain notation that the recorder of deeds had been paid $11 to enter the transfer as a voluntary sale, and that the original deed, the true one, the genuine recorded claim the dying man had swept to his grave, was held in the box. It was there, folded, sealed, 30 years in the dark, the proof of an honest man's right that the rich man had not destroyed, because a careful man keeps even the things that could hang him, the way a thrifty man cannot bear to burn good paper. Verena held the old deed in both hands in the lamplight and understood the whole shape of it at last. Whitfield had not feared the strongbox being opened by a marshal who came to take a fortune. There was no fortune to take. He had feared exactly this, a person who would understand that the worthless box held something far more dangerous than gold, the written proof of every theft, in his own hand, that turned a respectable old man on a hill back into what he had always been. She heard the boots in the doorway behind her before she heard the voice. Pike filled the broken doorway of the closet, blocking the gray morning light, and he looked at her and at the open box and the papers in her hands, and his closed-door face did not change. He did not draw anything, and he did not shout. He only held out one enormous flat hand, palm up, and said in a voice as level and administrative as a man reading a bill of lading, that he would take whatever she had found. "Mr. Whitfield," he said. The papers, though, were not hers, and they were not leaving the iron ran in her hands. Verena did not stand, and she did not argue, and she did not weep. She had spent her whole life, among men who were certain that a girl alone could not pay what she owed or hold what she found, and she had learned from a dead man that the way to answer such certainty was never with a louder voice. She looked up at the enormous watcher in the doorway, and she asked him one quiet question. She asked him whether his employer had told him what was in the box. Pike did not answer, and the not answering told her everything. He had been set to guard a strongbox for 30 years, or to wait at the mouth of one for 9 days, and never once had the careful man on the hill told the enormous, unreadable man what it was he was guarding, or whose ruin was written inside it, or whether the name Pike, somewhere down that long margin of erased men, belonged to a family Pike had once had. She told him. She did not accuse, and she did not plead. She turned the survey to the gray light, and she read him the column of names in her level voice, slowly, the way Tobias read a lock. And she watched the heavy stillness of the man's face hold, and then, at one name near the bottom of the margin, break quietly open. There was a Pike on the list, a Creek claim, a small one, taken in the 3rd summer of the boom on false grounds, the family scattered after. The enormous man stood in the doorway with his flat hand still half raised, and looked at his own name in the rich man's writing, the proof of why his people had walked off a worthless road 2 days from anywhere with nothing, and the hand came slowly down. He did not say very much. Men like Pike never do. He said that the old man had told him the box held money. He said he had guarded it, off and on, for 11 years, and had never once been let to see inside. And then he stepped back from the doorway and let the morning light into the closet, and he said that whatever she meant to do with the papers, she had best do it quickly, because he would not be the only one the old man had set to watch this road. It was Pike who carried the strongbox's papers out of the iron wren, because Verina's arms were spent, and his were not. And it was Pike who stood the last watch on the dead street, while she waited the 3 more days for the rider she had sent for. Orsana Calder came up the county road on the back of her grandson's wagon on the morning of the 4th day, an old woman wrapped against the October cold. Her hands knotted with age and her eyes clear, and Verina met her in the road outside the saloon and did not say a great deal. She led the old woman inside, into the closet behind the false wall, and she put into her knotted hands the genuine deed her grandfather had sworn to his death was real, the true, recorded claim to the richest piece of creek bottom in the Loomis Forks district, sealed and unbroken, 30 years in the dark. The old woman did not weep either. She held the deed in both hands the way Verina had held it, and she read the date on it. And she read her grandfather's name where the county book had said for 30 years that no such claim had ever honestly existed, and she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, in a voice gone thin with age but not with feeling, that her grandfather had told her as a girl that the truth of a thing does not stop being true because a rich man pays to have it written down a different way, and that she had carried that her whole life without ever once expecting to hold the proof of it. She folded the deed against her chest. She thanked Verina plainly, once, and that plain word landed harder than any speech could have. The undoing of Silas Whitfield did not come as a gunfight, or a confrontation, or a reckoning on the hill. It came the way the wrong had come on paper through the slow machinery of the territorial courts, but this time with the true ledger and the genuine deeds laid open before a federal judge who had no patience left for old rumors. The survey of the Loomis Forks, creek bottom with its 2 columns of names and dates in Whitfield's exact hand, was a confession 30 years in the writing, and there was no lawyer in the territory clever enough to argue that a man had not written what he had plainly written. The estate that had drawn out of half a county's stolen claims came apart slowly across the following 2 years. Claim by claim, name by name down the long margin, restitution made where heirs could be found, and the worthless erased made whole. Verena did not see the old man on the hill brought low, and she did not wish to. She had no taste for the spectacle of it. She heard the way one hears things, that Silas Whitfield lived out his last winter in the brick house, with the courts taking his estate apart beneath him, a piece at a time. An old man who had built his whole name and his whole life on the certainty that the proof was sealed forever behind a wall no marshal could find, and a lock no clever hand could read. Learning at the very end that he had been undone, not by the law he had outmaneuvered for 30 years, nor by the marshals he had outlasted, but by a girl with $4 and her dead uncle's tools who had simply been more patient than he was. He never met her. The wronged man's granddaughter never confronted him. The careful thief was answered not by anyone's voice but by his own, read back to him out of the box he had trusted. What the strongbox bought. Verena Maddox was not a fortune either. But the Calder family, restored to the value of the claim across the long settlement, pressed money on her, and she took only what cleared the $40 she owed Harlan Brett in the county seat, and the cost of the mule and the flour, and not $1 more, because Tobias had taught her that a person who labors to right a wrong and then enriches herself on it has only changed the name of the theft. She paid Harlan Brett his $40 in full in the spring, in front of the same 2 clerks, and she did not say "I told you so" because she had nothing to tell him. She had only opened a door. She went back to Loomis Forks one last time the following autumn, a year after she had first walked the dead street, and she found it changed. The Calder grandson had begun, with the restored claim, to work the creek bottom honestly, and there were 2 tents and a sluice down by the water now where there had been only silence, and the sound of the creek running clear over the rifflebox carried up the dead street for the first time in 30 years. She walked up to the iron wren, leaning still at its slow angle, and she went inside, into the back room, and she stood before the false wall where it hung open now, on its rusted hinge, the closet behind it empty, the cold sealed air long since gone out of it and replaced by ordinary October. She had carried something with her up the county road, wrapped in oilcloth, and now she unwrapped it. It was the great brass dial of the strongbox which she had taken off the iron face before the box was carried away, one piece of the thing she had wanted to keep. She turned it once in her cracked hands in the gray light, feeling the old, smooth action of the wheels she had spent 9 days learning to read, the maker's hand still in it after all these years. Then she set it on the sill of the broken back window, where the morning came through. A small, dark brass thing catching the light, facing out toward the creek she could hear running clear again below the dead town. A lock is a sentence written by a man who wanted to be obeyed, her uncle had told her, a lifetime ago, holding a tumbler up to the window light. She had answered this one. She stood a while longer, in the cold and the quiet, an ordinary young woman. The world had been certain could not pay what she owed or hold what she found. And then she turned and walked back down the dead street toward the sound of the water and did not look behind her, and left the brass dial on the sill to catch the light.